the check for that last part is in the mail. I appreciate that. All right. Get a little arranged here. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. This day is thoroughly about y'all and your accomplishments, which are great. A lot of great spirits in this church today. And I've thoroughly enjoyed teaching y'all and teaching all the classes I've been able to at Lawrence Academy. I've entitled this speech, not a sermon, speech, a bouquet. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament you just heard, Stella just quoted it, is from 2 Peter. I think that passage is the most wonderful instruction on godliness, and it's encased in such beautiful kind of poetic form. It's just really rare. Everything's just put so succinctly. It's tied up. It's beautiful for how simple it is. Peter is instructing a persecuted church there, and he's telling them to supply virtue upon virtue and be diligent to do that. And in so doing, what they would do is form a whole system that'll render them productive. It'll render a fruitful life. Faith, rightly considered, is always concerned with output and not just your own personal appraisal of sincerity. Real faith is going to render a product, and that product is called good works. Now, y'all have been praised for your good works so far, and I love the detail with which that's dutifully commended to y'all, because you ought to be awarded for your good works, and y'all have got tons of those, and you will have more. You're going to do great things. So the passage has been read. What's wonderful about that passage is it's kind of like a daisy chain of virtues, as some commentators have put it. Other people have called it a chorus of virtue, right? You've got all of these things being added to each other so that they form a whole thing. And that whole thing is a virtuous life. So as I said, I've heard over the years, it's one of my favorite books. So I've read a lot of commentaries on it. People have called it a daisy chain of virtue, a chorus of virtue. I submit to you today a third. I call it a bouquet of virtue. A bouquet. I mentioned to Davis in passing a couple of weeks ago, I said, Davis, I got a gift for y'all. Now, this is not the gift I originally intended. The gift I originally intended did not arrive. So I will be in touch with y'all about that later. It's an inside joke between me and your class. Y'all probably already know what it involves. But nevertheless, that will be in the mail, actually. But this is a second gift. This is a gift of words I'm giving to y'all of a different kind. What's a bouquet? A bouquet is a deliberate and skilled arrangement of like objects, traditionally and usually flowers, right? Modernly, also fruit that smells like cigarettes, thanks to the delivery driver. If anyone has ever ordered an edible arrangement, you can read that on the reviews. It arrived on time, but it smelled like cigarettes. So if you ever want some cigarette-flavored fruit and you don't have any, just order from Edible Arrangements, apparently. So, that's not the kind of bouquet that we like to think about, but nevertheless, those are the two situations where you hear bouquet mentioned: flowers and cigarette fruit. Okay? So, what do they have in common? A bouquet, it's a cohesive, whole, larger thing. It exists to bring pleasure. It's a piece of art, but it also serves a very real function culturally. It transmits value, right? It's not just a thing in itself. It's a thing that renders a thing. to the point that bouquet of virtues is tied to a singular human life, yours. You are not just a sum of your parts, you're a whole person, and more than just a person, you're a message. And the targeted recipient is twofold, God and your neighbor. The chief command called the Shema is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And of course, Jesus famously added, the second greatest command is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. In your life, your bouquet which you present before God and humanity, we cannot speak of these virtues as individual, but as a whole, just as you are a whole person. Our interest in them individually is only so far as what they're able to add to the whole. Yes, they stand on their own, but bundled together, they also ought to be considered together for what they provide together within you. So as a gift to you all, I offer an additional bouquet. 2 Peter 1, 5 through 8 has been a part of the biblical canon for 2,000 years, give or take. Like 1,700 years. Check me on that. It was one of the late additions to the canon, but it made it safely into the canon. Nevertheless, it's been with you. What I'm offering now is not Bible. It's just my own musings. But nevertheless, it is a bouquet. Okay? The bouquet speaks of virtue, and that virtue speaks of a life well lived, each one providing respectively the following, and I will list them now. Here's the charge, and I'm going to repeat this again at the end. Make every effort to enrich your life by pursuing vision, competency, character, a wild card here, number 4, redundancy, and number 5, empathy. So what does that speak to? Vision, perspective for progress. Okay? Competency, power to perform. Character, power to remain. Redundancy, foreplanning against potential peril. And finally, fifthly, empathy speaks to letting love lead overall. Letting love lead in all things. So quickly, vision. Living your life means leading your life, and leading presumes vision. Here's a saying, like a ship without a sail, so is a person who lacks vision for their life. Solomon said this in Proverbs 29:18, where there's no vision, the people are unrestrained, but happy is he who keeps the law. These couplets we see so often in Proverbs, I want to encourage you to read the Proverbs often, because they're going to keep coming up in your life if you keep reading them. They ought not to be passed over so quickly. We fly over these because they seem so basic, but the wisdom is in the basic. So don't fly over it. Rest on it. Let it speak to you. Okay? So in this, we can quickly fly over it. I'm telling us not to. It's not simply saying, if you keep God's law, you'll be blessed. It's saying at least that, but it's not just saying that. He's contrasting that blessed state, that happiness, with unrestrainedness. Okay? So take note of that. He's teaching something far beyond obeying God makes you happy. Okay? He's amplifying that happiness as a contrast to directionlessness. Likewise, he equates not observing God's command with lacking vision, which tracks well when we consider the psalmist who penned in Psalm 119, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Too often we equate restraint with sorrow. Walling off possibilities in this culture is seen as a cultural sin. Now, I'm no architect. My wife is a trained architect, but I'm not. But I like architecture. And one thing I can tell you about it is this. Some walls are load-bearing. You can't just remove all the walls and expect the structure to maintain its integrity. And so we got to make sure that we have proper vision to inform us on what to do and how to do it. Vision is wisdom. Number 2, competency. There's thankfully no shortcut to competency except through the rigors of academic discipline and mental engagement. There's no shortcut. You got to know the stuff. If you don't know the stuff, there's nothing that can compensate for that. You've heard it said, fake it till you make it. We've all heard that one, right? It's too many steps. Just simply make it. The fact is, if we're going to buy into the dichotomy of there's a fake and then there's a make, well, at what point have you arrived? If we're always in the process of learning, at what point are you no longer faking it? At what point are you actually making it? The fact is, we do what we can with what we have from where we're at. And you know what? That's enough. That's quite enough. That's competency. It begins with vision, and then it gives its fruit in due time. We're always in cycle. We'll always learn more. If you're engaged, you're always going to grow as a person, and you ought to. You ought to. Thirdly, character. It's been well said that character is best seen when nobody's looking at you. The master down, we're open to an audience of one, and that's God. God cares about our character development because God is holy. I was talking with someone about that before the service. It's the difference between legalism and holiness, right? Nevertheless, God has standards. God cares about character because he himself is holy. Practically, character ends up being the moral framework out of which every good work will be enabled to flow and then keep on flowing. Keep on flowing. Proverbs 4:23, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Proverbs 25:26, like a trampled spring and a polluted well, so is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. I've adapted a well-loved quote. I first heard it in the charismatic circles. They would say, don't let your calling take you to where your character can't keep you. Don't let your competency take you to where your character cannot keep you. Proverbs 22:29, do you see a truly competent worker? He will serve before kings and not in the presence of unknown men. Well, here's the thing. Someone might well serve before kings if they're skilled, but they aren't going to stay there unless they got character, right? Yeah. A tooth. Anyone here ever had a tooth? Raise your hands. This is the engagement part. Anyone here okay, let's get more specific. Anyone here ever had a tooth that started to decay a little bit and you didn't realize it? Yeah. Creepy. It creeps up on you. Over the course of months and years, then all of a sudden it'll break while snacking on some mixed nuts in Florida. An older, harder nut that was blended into the batch you're enjoying decides to shake hands with that failing tooth. And that nut forever is blamed for the failing tooth. Was it that singular nut? No, that nut was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. It was the nut that broke the tooth. So what happens? Pain ensues, disbelief quickly follows, sorrow takes over at the realization of your loss, regret trickles in as you realize, boy, I should have just taken better care of these bad boys because now I got a big old bill on my hand. All of a sudden we say, but was it actually all of a sudden? No, it wasn't all of a sudden. Of course it wasn't. Like competency, character demands your active engagement, and regularly, as our moral framework is constructed, then tried and tested at the youthful juncture of life. Be careful that it's found sound, able to push forth good works, and for the long haul. Neglect your own character to your demise. Fourthly, we have redundancy. In most contexts, redundancy is used as a negative. Redundancy there indicates the presence of something unneeded, right? And even undesired because it's unneeded. But in engineering, redundancy indicates careful consideration for the possibilities of failure. So you plan ahead. Backup systems. Redundancy should be considered as shrewdness when it comes to the matters of life. Let me get practical here and tighten up the bouquet because I'm about 2/3 done, maybe a little more. Think about your highest vision. Consider your competency goals. Consider your framework of character. Then consider that sometimes things still just won't work as you had planned. That's life. So what do you do about that? You got to do something. You can't do nothing. You got to forge ahead one way or the other. So give yourself the best chance for success. Lawrence Academy's done that for you. They've loaded up your quiver with arrows, They've given you essentially, most go into college as fresh or sophomores, or right at the door of being a sophomore, if I remember correctly. Is that accurate? Yeah, that's a great leap ahead. So I call on you, I charge you, senior charge, I charge you, plan for what is yet to present to you as a problem. How? Well, one practical way is by simply adding another track of competency. I'm talking about double majoring. It can mean so many things. Just engage with the concept as a whole. It could mean many things to you. But you need to go ahead and plan ahead, cast your vision wide, and hope for the best. Fifthly, empathy not only brings us full circle, but also brings us firmly back onto the ground where we started. Just as redundancy is a safeguard for the vision of one's own life, empathy is a safeguard for one's humanity. My alma mater, Holmes Bible College, has as its motto, live for others. And they've been turning out ministers and missionaries since 1898, even remaining open through the Great Depression and both world wars. They didn't close, not 1 year. They trusted in the Lord, and God provided for them. And they had some lean years, but they're still here. Thank God. The Apostle Paul told the Philippian church, don't merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interest of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. In Galatians, he writes, while we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who are of the household of the faith. It's been said that life is what happens when we're busy making plans. I want you to consider empathy here. The life God smiles upon is what happens when we allow ourselves to turn aside to help our neighbor. Think of the good Samaritan. Recapping and coming in for a close, tying a ribbon around the whole thing now. Vision commends us to a grand and full life. Competency gives us capacity to reach that vision. Character enables us to attain it and keep that goal. Redundancy demonstrates humility and wisdom before life, which can be brutal. And fifthly, empathy reminds us this is not all about us. After all, as self-involved all of this is, it's ultimately not all about us. This life is about serving God, and we cannot do that without serving each other. I'll leave you now with the statement I made at the start. Now a fully formed bouquet, I hand it all to you virtually for your appraisal and acceptance. The Lawrence Academy class of 2023. Make every effort to enrich your life by pursuing vision, competency, character, redundancy, and empathy. This will demonstrate your love and faith in God and love for your neighbor. Thank you.